The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
So I'm in a studio with multiple TVs with the sound turned down, so I can only ascertain what's being talked about by the crawl at the bottom of the screen. And I got one of them on ESPN, and the Get Up show is on. And on the 2nd of June, the crawl says, and this is what they're talking about, Pete Schrager, who came over from the NFL Network, and Greenberg and some other analysts. Here's what they're talking about. Not the baseball circumstance, the French Open. No. Can Dak Prescott have a breakout year for the Dallas Cowboys? This is what every other sport in America is up against. The NFL is a freaking monster. We are 3 months, more than 3 months away from the start of the NFL season. And that's what they're talking about on the 2nd of June. Not even the NBA Finals. Well, they've segued into the NBA Finals. It's now after 9 o'clock, so most people have left the house and gotten on the road to work by now, so they can bury this. But these are NBA Finals, which, according to the odds makers, look like going to be short. Looks like a blowout for Oklahoma City. The Thunder are among the biggest favorites ever in the NBA Finals. Now, the biggest ever was the Lakers in 2001. They were minus 2,000. That was against Allen Iverson and the Philadelphia 76ers and Dikembe Mutombo. Larry Brown was the coach. This was the first of the three-peat by Kobe and Shaq. And, in fact, the Lakers won the series 4-1, but Philadelphia won the first game. It was kind of like, whoa, hey, wait a minute. Maybe we're going to have a series. We didn't have a series. Lakers won. The second biggest favorite was the Warriors against the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2018. This was 2 years after LeBron and the Cavaliers beat the Warriors, who had 73 wins. But as I recall, they were missing Kyrie Irving, and I believe Kevin Love was out as well. So it was kind of LeBron on his own. And, in fact, the Warriors won in a sweep 4-0. Number 3, third biggest favorite, not a surprise. This was the 72-win Chicago Bulls in 1996 against Seattle. And as you recall, Jordan never went 7 in the finals, but sometimes he would, Potsky around a little bit. They would go up 3-1 and lose a game. So, in fact, the Bulls won the series in 6, 4-2. Number 4 was the Spurs in 1999, where they beat the Knicks. They were minus 900. But as I remember, Patrick Ewing had a broken wrist. He didn't play in that series. So, again, missing a key player. And San Antonio, that was the first of the championships with David Robinson and Tim Duncan together. 2000, the Lakers were minus 800 against the Pacers. Again, that series unexpectedly went 6 with the Lakers winning. Then 2002, Lakers against the Nets, minus 750. Lakers swept that series. And then this year, the Thunder minus 700. Now, there was one where an overwhelming favorite lost, and this was the 2004 Lakers with kind of a last run at it with Kobe and Shaq, but they added 2 guys looking for rings, Gary Payton and Karl Malone. Wasn't enough. Pistons won the series 4-1. And then I think, history has to judge as to how these players match up. And, could Bill Russell play today, Will Chamberlain, the whole ridiculous argument. So this is, it's a generation ago. It's almost 40 years ago. But to me, the best team I ever saw was the 86 Celtics with Bird, Parrish, and McHale in their primes, plus Bill Walton with an unexpectedly healthy year as the sixth man, maybe the greatest sixth man to ever play. And they wound up beating the Rockets in 6 games. They were minus 700. So on paper, this looks like a lopsided series. But, again, that's why they play the games. I remember 1975. Wow, 50 years ago. 50 years ago, Bullets were the best team in the league. And to get to the finals, they had to run the gauntlet. They had to beat both Philadelphia and Boston to get there, and that was the team that got swept by the Golden State Warriors with Rick Barry And I think one of the real differences was Barry was great. He was tremendous in that series. But the real difference for the Bullets in 75 was they had a six-man named Jimmy Jones. And Jimmy Jones got hurt either in the Philly series or the Boston series, hurt his knee. And in those days, probably a torn ACL and really never came back from it. But not having him available for depth, that was really the key because Golden State was playing 9 guys, and they just wore the Bullets down. If you look at all 4 of the games, Bullets had the lead in the first half, into the third quarter, sometimes even into the fourth quarter. But the combination of Barry and the depth was too much. And as an underdog, because remember, this was a Warriors team that didn't play very well at the beginning of the season, started to come together in the playoffs, but were taken to 7 games by Dick Motta's Chicago Bulls, and I believe Game 7 went into overtime. Bullets were rested and ready, of course, minus Jimmy Jones, but rested and ready with healthy Phil Chenier and Wes Unseld, Elvin Hayes, the whole deal. That was probably the best roster that they had. The team that won in 78 was starting to get a little bit older, and Chenier didn't play because of a back injury in those finals. So I think of the talent teams that they had, that was the peak. It's just that they ran into a Golden State team that was healthy and deep and ready to win, and wound up sweeping them. That would go down as one of the great upsets, but the Bullets were not overwhelming favorites going into that series. Anyway, with Indiana wrapping things up on Saturday night, and it was kind of a letdown game, big build up, Game 6, and Indiana dominated. They won the game 125-108, and now we're starting to hear what may have been going on behind the scenes. Karl Anthony Towns, really was a huge difference in getting the series to Indiana for Game 6, playing on a bad knee. But according to a report from The Athletic, the coaches and some of the players expressed frustration with Karl Anthony Towns' defensive shortcomings. Now, why does a team like Minnesota make Karl Anthony Towns available? Probably because he doesn't play any defense. And according to what these 2 reporters from The Athletic, James Edwards and Fred Katz, are reporting, publicly, the Knicks made veiled comments all season about poor communication causing their inconsistency. Behind the scenes, the coaches expressed frustration with Towns' defensive habits, less concerned with his talent level and more with his process on that end. Too often, Towns executed incorrect coverages without communicating why he did it. After it became a theme, players worried that Towns didn't grasp the importance of the matter. Yeah, well, they pay him to score points, and the defense doesn't necessarily get him recognized. And, if you're going to put in effort, he's going to put it on the offensive end of the court. Now, they understood this when they made the trade for him at the end of training camp. And they got to the Eastern Finals. That's further than they had been since, 2000. But they couldn't get over the hump, and maybe some of it had to do with the defensive shortcomings of Karl Anthony Towns. They also mortgaged a lot of the future to get him. They traded away picks, and they got rid of Dante DiVincenzo, who was a hell of a three-point shooter. Big difference for Minnesota. But in the end, they were not able to get past Indiana. So that's what we got for a finals. It doesn't start till Thursday. I'm not sure why we have to wait so long. Maybe it's TV related, but it'll start on ABC on Thursday. Meantime, that's it for what is considered to be the greatest pre- and post-game show, not just in the history of the NBA, but maybe in the history of sports. Now, I would say that the NFL today changed the game. If you put it on TV today, would it hold up? No. But what Brent Musburger and Jimmy the Greek and Phyllis George and Irv Cross created in the 70s was the template for the modern pregame show. Now, it was taken to another level by this group inside the NBA, first with Ernie Johnson and Kenny the Jet Smith, and then Charles Barkley retired. He comes aboard, Shaq comes aboard, and the 4 of them have made television history. And at least on the TNT end, it's all over. This was their last game because once the Eastern Conference Finals were over, the contract ends with TNT, and everything goes over to ABC and NBC next year. And this will be, I don't think it'll be for every game, but the Inside the NBA show will be on ABC and ESPN. I guess they're still going to do some of what they do, because they do a hell of a lot more games on ESPN than they did on TNT. So we'll still have Malika Andrews hosting with Stephen A. Smith, and Wilbon's on sometimes, and I guess they have a rotating group of other people. But this is the gold standard. Everybody knows that, and it is going to move to ESPN, which is going to feel kind of odd. And while they've had a lot of latitude on TNT, we'll see what happens once they get to ESPN. Now, I found this to be curious, and I don't think they beeped it out. In the farewell, after the Pacers had wrapped things up on Saturday night, Kenny gave his farewell and Shaq gave his farewell, both dropping F-bombs, which, I thought was a little bit over the top. Barkley and Ernie a little bit better behaved, Ernie especially, as they said their farewells, and this is their part of the goodbyes on Saturday night.
I got lucky and made one of the best decisions ever. I was obviously going to go to NBC, and a friend of mine, Michael Jackson, says, come to have dinner at Turner to make me look good. And these guys took me out to dinner, and after 5 hours, I had to call the great Dick Ebersol and say, hey, man, I'm going to change my mind. I want to thank Dick Ebersol for making me think about doing television. But I want to thank Mark Lazarus, who hired me, David Levy, my old boss, and Tara August, my best friend. She's been there for me the whole time. I just want to thank every single person who's been at Turner with me the last 25 years. 25 years. Some of these people have had kids. They come see us for their prom. They come back when they graduate college, and now they're bringing newborns in. So if you with people that long, they are your family. And I just want to thank everybody at Turner for the last 25 years. It's been an honor, and I'm grateful and thankful. And also to ESPN, it's going to be an honor and a privilege to work for you guys. You guys are the #1 sports network in history, and I'm excited for it. You guys got some tremendous talents over there. I'm looking forward to co-working with those guys. But like I say, man, I just want to say thank you to the NBA, every coach I've had, every player I played with for giving me this magnificent life that I've had. I am so lucky and blessed. I'm lucky and blessed. And I want to thank TNT, and even though we'll never say TNT Sports again, I want to thank TNT for giving me a magnificent life.
I'll try to keep this brief.
Take your time.
Several years ago, I wrote a book called Unscripted, and I asked people to embrace the unscripted, not fear the unscripted. If I had written the script, the NBA and TNT would be together forever. It's not going to happen. But while I was disappointed and I was sad, I was not bitter. We know how business works. Gratitude is the operative word for me. Grateful that, since 1989, I've been with this company. No matter what you call the company, I'll always be Turner. And I'm grateful that I work with you guys. I'm grateful for all of the relationships we've built professionally and personally through the years. You just don't realize that until you see people here on the road and say, hey, this is probably going to be it. And you think back to all the good times you had. So I'm grateful for that, and also grateful that we have members of our crew who are going to go work at NBC or work at Amazon. And you know how they got those jobs? Because their resume says NBA on TNT. So thank you. We have been honored to do this. And we look forward. The four of us, as you've already heard, the four of us are going to be together. Our production crew is going to be together. It's going to be that same bunch. We're still going to be shooting that show in Atlanta. It's just going to air somewhere else. And so the craziness that you've seen, the nonsense and the foolishness and the top-notch basketball analysis, all of that stuff's going to be on. It's going to be on ESPN or ABC next year, not on TNT. For that, we're sad. But I'm proud to say for the last time, thanks for watching us. It's the NBA on TNT.
That's good. That was Charles Barkley and Ernie Johnson, part of their farewells on Saturday night as the Indiana Pacers knocked out the Knicks in 6. And I know we've had well-known broadcasters move from one network to another. Brent Musburger famously left CBS in 1990, not over money. This is crazy. He was the man at CBS, much in the way that Jim Nantz is now. But they had added baseball. At that time, Brent was already doing, of course, the NFL Today on CBS. He was the voice of college basketball and the Final Four. He was working on Masters coverage, and they added baseball. He wanted to do that too. And CBS said, no, we want to have somebody else do that. And that's what he left over. He wound up at ABC, had a great run there as well, did college football. A lot of people thought, oh, he's a monster. He's going to take Al Michaels' job. Nope. Brent is a real pro. And I can't say that I know him, but I've met him a few times. I've had him on the air a number of times. And the way he handled things, both with the ESPN and ABC, incredibly professional. Really admire him. But that's one that made a move. There have been others over the years who have changed networks. But this is kind of like, not even exactly like, I remember the show Taxi. Taxi was a great show. And I think it moved in its last year from ABC to NBC or vice versa. But it did trade networks. This would be like, on this scale and this platform, like MASH leaving CBS to go to NBC. Something like that, some major show, one of the great television shows ever done. And how this is going to work is going to be new, because having worked with ESPN for 6 years when I did shows with Tony Kornheiser and Mel Kiper in the early part of the century, sounds funny to say that, early part of the century, one thing ESPN I noticed likes is control. They like people to be, or at that time, to be in Bristol. They like them to be around them in management. And for this show to be kind of a satellite show still operating out of Atlanta, how's that going to work? I think that was an insistence by Ernie, who lives in Atlanta. The other guys, I know Shaq, well, I don't know. I don't even know where Shaq lives. Maybe Florida. And Barkley lives in Phoenix, and I don't know where Kenny lives. So that could have been part of it. But it's going to be produced, I guess, by TNT and on ESPN/ABC. I guess it's really not going to matter too much to us as a viewer. But I just wonder about that, and wonder about if things go off the rail a little bit too much for ESPN's liking, because the control level, I think, is going to be a lot higher once they're on ESPN, and they will get more attention for some of the things that they say, because it gets redistributed through all their platforms and ESPN.com, and of course the TV and the radio, for whatever that means these days. But that was a nice farewell, and a new era begins. We'll see what happens in the fall when they come back from Atlanta, but on ESPN. Coming up, Josh Harris. I just came across this morning and didn't really have time to completely go through it, but I pulled a chunk of it, and I'll pull some more of it tomorrow probably. Josh Harris was on a podcast that is hosted by Alex Rodriguez and somebody named Jason Kelly, who I'm not familiar with, but it's called The Deal. And Josh was in Miami. I think he lives in Miami, as a matter of fact. And they arranged to have him on the podcast. They went about 45 minutes. And he went through the details of how the deal for D.C. came together. It still has to be voted on by the city council. We're about 6 weeks away from the deadline on that. But a couple of nuggets from this as he discussed the deal and how it was all put together. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
21 years ago today, Ken Jennings began a streak on Jeopardy, which has not been matched. 74 straight wins. 74 straight wins. 2003, they changed the rules. Used to be the limit, I think, was 6. And then somebody won 8. And then Ken Jennings comes along on this day in 2004 and strings together 74 straight wins. And now Ken Jennings is the host of Jeopardy! Funny how that all worked out. So we'll go through that in less than an hour. This broke late last night. I'm not sure you're aware of this by now. You remember the sports science segments that they used to do on ESPN? They may have even done a half-hour show. It was hosted by John Brinkus, and he was obviously very young when he did this. He's passed away at the age of 54, and while the family did not use the term suicide, they said that he had lost his fight after battling depression. I guess he was found late on Saturday night, and the news broke last night. He won 6 Emmy Awards for the show. He would tell you why this receiver was so fast, or how a quarterback can throw a ball this far. He was very enthusiastic about what he did. At times I remember it got a little bit tedious, but also it was educational and insightful, and just so sad that someone so young and so accomplished would take his own life, apparently. But that is mental health, and that is a big problem across the world. And very sad that John Brinkus has died at the age of 54. All right, on to the Commanders, and it is not a done deal yet because it has to be approved by the city council, but it seems to be moving down the tracks, and that is the deal to build the stadium on the old RFK site. There's some negotiating that has to go on. Some feel like the city kicking in $1 billion is too much. It's going to be 2.7 and overruns to be paid by the team, which is more obviously than they would have paid to stay in Maryland, but in the long run, it's going to be greater for them. And as part of the deal, they get land rights around the stadium, so they're going to have an opportunity to recoup a lot of that money by building hotels and restaurants and so forth and so on. But Josh Harris is selling, as you would expect. He wants this to go through the city council, and he was on a podcast recently that's done in Miami by Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly, who I guess is his partner. I'm not sure what his connection is to business or what exactly he does, but Harris does most of the talking in this segment that I pulled. And here he is explaining how this came together and how he was able to satisfy the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, in making this deal.
So the first thing we had to do is assure all through the process Governor Moore, who really cares about Landover.
The governor of Maryland.
The governor of Maryland. He wanted to make sure that, we said to him, look, we have to consider D.C. because it's the spiritual home of the Commanders. And he said, look, I'm willing to let you consider that and be generous about allowing you to have some options, but you need to convince me that you're gonna, build something in Maryland if you decide to leave. And so we concluded a deal with the governor, and that allowed for the the land to be transferred to D.C. So I don't know if you remember, but as the last Congress was sunsetting, we got 100-0 vote in the Senate.
Yes,
which moved the land to D.C. So until the land was under federal control, until the land was under D.C. control, and then it wasn't possible to build a stadium. From there, we went into we had negotiations going with a lot of different parties, and we're blessed that everyone wants the Commanders, and ultimately concluded a deal with the mayor that would be highly beneficial for D.C. And at $2.7 billion, which is what we're putting up. It's the largest investment in D.C. ever. So it's the largest investment in D.C.'s history. And so once the mayor decided that it was okay, we signed a term sheet with the mayor, and now we're working with the D.C. City Council, who, the project has incredible ROI for D.C., literally billions of tax revenues, thousands of homes, and thousands of jobs, right? And
affordable homes.
And of that, 30% are by agreement going to be, at least that will be affordable homes. And so it's going to raise the standard. And then you get an amazing entertainment district. And I mean, who's not going to play in a new stadium with the backdrop being literally the capital? Right? And then you get the redevelopment on the Anacostia River. So this is going to change DC. And so I'm hopeful that the council's doing its work. A number of them are already supporting that, but we have some work to do. So now the next step for us is to obviously get the council's vote. You've got to tell the citizens and the politicians, why this is good for the city, why they should invest their money in this. And the reality is DC is going through a harder time right now, and we were very sensitive to that and made sure that this deal was very good for DC. But I'm also focused on making it a place where our opponents fear to come, which is how I grew up, and where our fans love to come.
Yeah.
And, our RFK, right, was, it was an incredible arena. I mean, the stands would shake, and it was a smaller arena, but it was loud, and, people showed up.
Yeah. And so I want to talk even more broadly about, you've got multiple arena projects going on literally around the world. But before we get there, and maybe to lead into that, how do you balance the sort of private and public funds of it all? I mean, this has been like one of the substantial questions around developing stadiums. How did you come to sort of the calculus there?
Yeah, so if you look at the calculus, we had to make sure that it was very favorable to DC. And so because that's definitely something that people consider. Sometimes there's the ROI of a stadium, but they also want to know, okay, how much is the city contributing? And the RFK site has been sitting there since they closed RFK.
Right.
And it's like crumbling concrete. I mean, it's not great, right? There's nothing there. Nothing's been done with it.
And generating zero,
generating zero, and actually costing money to make sure it's safe, because it's just an open air thing. And, there are, pests and everything else. So whatever they do, whatever DC decides to do, they're going to have to put a bunch of money into that site, just, creating sewage and infrastructure and other things. And then we paid for everything else.
Okay.
And when you benchmark it, there's actually articles that say, wow, did the Commanders get a good enough deal? And, we're getting criticized, which I guess if that's the criticism, people are leveling at me.
The criticism is that you didn't get enough
criticism
money
in certain NFL
right.
sports.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
So I'll take that criticism, because on the other side of that, we have to convince DC and the public that it's fair, and we have to convince the council that it's fair, and the mayor has to sell it, and the public is overwhelmingly supportive. Which I think should help us. I mean, I think that usually these things are more controversial, but everyone who grew up in D.C. or in the DMV knows that they remember what a great place RFK was and how unifying it was, and what it was like when Washington football was dominant in the NFL. And I think we can bring it there again.
So you've been a deal maker for a long time. A lot of the deals you seem to be doing right now are for stadiums and arenas. You have a deal that we'd love to talk about to build a new arena in South Philly. Then you've got a big project in South London with Crystal Palace, the football club that you're an owner of as well. What's the common thread there?
Yeah, so the common thread is building amazing fan experience, player experience, and something that helps the cities, right? So you're ultimately, in finance, you're a steward of people's capital. In sports, you're a steward of people's memories and how they feel. So how the Commanders do, how the teams play, makes the city happy or the area happy, and then you have to treat everyone incredibly well. And so if you start with that as a premise, you say, I'm going to be guided. My North Star is going to be, how do we create amazing memories? I had amazing memories at RFK. I remember some of my earliest memories. I remember being 4 years old. Literally 4 years old, and walking in there with my dad and, just hearing it all. And I don't remember a lot about it, but then I remember being 8 and Washington football losing to the Dolphins 14-7 in the Super Bowl. And Garo Upremian block kick was the one touchdown. Washington ran all the way back, and we lost 14-7. Dolphins were 17-0, Don Choi and Greasy.
Yeah.
On Sundays, D.C. would shut down, and D.C. is obviously, if not the most important, amongst the most important cities in the world. And everyone would be glued to their TVs or at the stadium. I remember riding my bike to the store once and no one's out. They're all watching football. So I think that I want to bring those days back, and I want to make DC proud. And it's the same would go for Philly and London. Whatever you do, it has to be about the fans and about the experience and about the players and enhancing their experience and their ability to win, because winning really matters.
Obviously, and that's why if the recent poll that was done by the Washington Post that fans feel a lot differently about the name Commanders this year than they did a year ago. That's Josh Harris. The podcast is called The Deal. It's hosted by Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly. The last part, that's really how we got here, is that the Snyder-owned team, whether it was the Redskins or Washington football team or Commanders, they treated the fan base like they were dirt beneath their feet. And they acted like they were doing people a favor if they sold them tickets. And people stopped buying the tickets and stopped showing up. You got to treat people right. You got to give them amenities. You got to not have sewage pipes that leaks on people sitting in club seats or railings that collapse when they want to get Jalen Hurts' autograph. Those are things that he's done. He's dumped $75 million into the stadium just to make it inhabitable. And he's got an understanding of you've got to have a relationship with the fan base, which Dan Snyder never did. He was just looking to squeeze the last dollar out of them for, all kinds of crazy things that happened over the years. Like at one time, Landover Mall was a place you could park, and then you could walk along Bright Seat Road to get into the stadium. Well, they cut off fan access to that because they wanted to squeeze them for the $45 parking charge. Snyder bought up peanuts from an airline that went out of business, weren't selling peanuts with shells on them because they said, somebody could have a peanut allergy and a piece of shell could go flying through the air and they could breathe it in and they could die. He sold expired beer. I mean, they're just the things that went on during those years, which, ultimately led to the disaster that it was at the end and finally forced the sale, not because of that, but other things, and including the toxic culture that they ran. So he's got an understanding of that. The other part of that I found interesting was the conversation that he had with Wes Moore. Now, Wes Moore, as the governor of Maryland, understands that while financially this might have been good for the state, the constituents, the people that live in the state, they want the stadium to be where it is, or where it hopefully will be on the RFK site. So he knows that. They did agree to take down FedEx Field, or now Northwest Stadium, when they move out. The likely, if this happens, the likely of the last season they'll play there is 2029, and then they will take it down. And he also said something there about developing that land. So they own it. The Commanders own that land. And what Wes Moore is saying, we don't want to have another RFK site with a rotting stadium and nothing built around it. So Harris has agreed to build on that site. Well, I mean, there'll be places that they can build. They can build restaurants, apartments, hotels, whatever it is, and that's their business. They're in the developmental business. So that was a pretty easy out. And the rest of it, is selling. Now, this other thing, and I hope I'll get the opportunity to talk to Josh Harris about this at some point. The stands shaking. If the stands at RFK Stadium shook, they would have shut the place down, okay? I did high school football back in my early days in Texas, where high school football was king, particularly in Port Arthur. And a 15,000-seat stadium would be filled with 15,000 people. And those stands would shake because they were actual stands. If RFK Stadium shook, that would be a problem. There's a section of seats, and I think I have to look this up again. Either they expanded from 50 to 55,000 when Vince Lombardi became the coach in 1969, or it was George Allen. But they had temporary seats which had to be taken out for baseball, because where the temporary seats at RFK were, that was part of the outfield. So that had to come out for baseball. They only held 50,000, or actually 48,000 for baseball. It was able to be pumped up to 55 for football because of these temporary seats. And the temporary seats actually rolled. So when the baseball season would start, you could roll the stands beyond the center field fence, and that's where they would sit until the following football season. Well, the reason that those stands shook was because, yes, they were on rollers. They had springs, and they were designed that way. And as part of the romanticism of the time, the NFL films, when they have the fans shouting, "We want Dallas, we want Dallas," they're not going to show the upper deck. They're going to show those stands bouncing up and down. So it was only that section. It's cool to talk about that, but let's put that into perspective. And also, little small thing for Josh Harris, the Super Bowl, Gary Yepremian was lining up to kick a field goal, which would have made it 17-0. It wasn't Mike Bass blocking the field goal and taking it back. The kick was blocked by Bill Brundage. It bounced back to Gary Yepremian, who did one of the stupidest things anybody has ever seen. Rather than fall on the ball or throw it out of bounds, even if he just pushed it to the ground, it would have been just a blocked field goal. Instead, he decided to throw a pass for whatever reason. The pass got tipped up in the air. Mike Bass picked it off and took it in for a touchdown. Now, the postscript to that is, and years later I interviewed Gary Yepremian about this, the postscript is that Yepremian was making $20,000 a year. This 1972 season with the Miami Dolphins, 53 years ago. So $20,000 was a pretty decent salary, and he was just a kicker. And in the offseason, he said he was in such demand on the banquet circuit that he made another $40,000 making appearances, talking about his stupidity on the field. So in one way, it was really dumb and could have cost the Dolphins the game because, Washington gets the ball back. They tie it up, goes to overtime. Who knows? There's still a couple minutes left in the game. And that made the teammates hate him in some ways. But for him, it was a big windfall. He made a lot of money off of that. All right, coming up, more on the NBA Finals outlook from Tim Legler. And it was 21 years ago today that Ken Jennings began his amazing streak on Jeopardy. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. And off we go with the NBA Finals. They don't start until Thursday. So by the time the two teams take the court, my goodness, Oklahoma City will have been off for 9 days, and the Indiana Pacers will have been off since Saturday. So they both should be well rested. A little bit more rest for Oklahoma City or a little bit more rust, but they are overwhelming favorites to win this. One of the all-time favorites to win in the finals. We'll go through those numbers, a little preview from Tim Legler on that. And it was 21 years ago today that we first learned the name Ken Jennings, who has gone on to something absolutely remarkable on Jeopardy. Not only the longest win streak, but he went on to host the show. I mean, just crazy. And while something has been lost with the death of Alex Trebek, who was great, but not the first. You know that most people probably don't know that the original host of the show was Art Fleming. And Art Fleming was the host of Jeopardy when I was growing up, when I was sick, not often from school. My track record's pretty good on that. But when I stay home or in the summer when, watch Jeopardy, it was a morning TV show in those days. He would come out and after the introduction of, and now the host of Jeopardy, here's Art Fleming. And he would say, "Thank you, Don Pardo." That's the first time I'd heard the name Don Pardo. So when Saturday Night Live came along, when I was in high school, that's 50 years ago, he was the voice of, because that's the union, that's the way it worked, NBC, he had to do all the announcing. And I guess they would introduce him as the announcer, and he'd say, "Now it's Saturday night," and then that's how everything would, or after, I guess, the intro skit, where the people on it would say, "Live from New York, it's Saturday night," and then he'd go through all the people who were on the show. Anyway, that's a long, convoluted way of saying that the original host was not the great Alex Trebek. It was, in fact, Art Fleming. But Trebek took it to another level. Okay, let's get to the NBA Finals, which get underway on Thursday. And Jerry Brewer, who's an excellent columnist with the Washington Post, so good that 5 or 6 years ago, they allowed him to do something that I guess would not have happened 25 years ago. But they said, okay, you want to move back to Seattle. His wife was from there. He had worked in Seattle for a long time. They wanted to be closer to family. So they moved back there, and he continues to write for the Post. Now, I think something's lost where he really, can't go out to Ashburn and write a column on the Commanders. He can't really go to games here, but he does a lot of national stuff, and I guess the Post is okay with that. He writes about the loss of the Seattle Supersonics. They left town. Hard to believe that they left for Oklahoma City 17 years ago. They actually had drafted Kevin Durant. They had Durant. He was there for 1 year, and they took that team to Oklahoma City. They made the finals once and lost. And, they have not won a championship since they were the Seattle Sonics in 1979. And, two things on that. One, the NBA really wasn't what the NBA is now or was in the 80s in 1979. That was kind of like the dividing line of when they went from a league that, seriously, there was talk that would go out of business. That's how serious things were. And then Bird and Magic come along the following year, and everything ramps up. David Stern understands how to market stars. TV networks come along, and things change dramatically. But when the Sonics, after playing the Bullets back-to-back years, they lost in 78 and beat them in 79, it was really a different kind of a league, and they have been really a forgotten team. And, I think of the Sonics moving to Oklahoma City, where they are, again, big favorites, minus 700 to win the NBA Finals, how you would look at them versus how we would look at baseball here with the Texas Rangers. Like, for me, I was 13 years old when the Senators moved to Texas. And for 33 years, we didn't have baseball. And then we get baseball in 2005. And so in the years between 71, when they left, and 2018, you can do the math on that, we got no World Series championship here. We'd had no World Series championship long before that. Senators left in 71. It was an expansion team that had replaced the original Senators, who hadn't won a World Series since 1924. But there is some solace in the fact that we in Washington got a World Series championship before the Texas Rangers did 2 years ago. They had made it a couple of times, made it to the World Series early part of the century, but didn't win until 2 years ago. So there is that. Seattle people, it looks like they will go these 17 years without a team and watch their team win an NBA championship. It's almost like what happened in Cleveland, where the Browns leave in 1995, right? 1995, and they go to Baltimore and they see the Ravens win the championship after the 2000 season. That was their team. A lot of the players had played in Cleveland. So this is kind of a tough spot, and he writes about the pain of them losing the team, how Howard Schultz, the Starbucks founder, had sold the team for $350 million. It's probably worth 10 times that now. And the hope is that they get a new arena. I have some personal interest in that because my son and daughter-in-law live in Seattle, and my son has said that he will become a fan of that team if and when they get one. And it looks like the NBA is going to expand in two places. It's going to go to Vegas, and it's going to go to Seattle. But so far, nothing on that, and nothing official announced on that. But they would like to build an arena not far from where the baseball and football stadiums are, which is walking distance of the Fish Market, which I've done. And it's amazing how close those two are together. You can almost touch one against the other. But the basketball will be down there as well, kind of like in Philadelphia, where they have all the arenas in the same place. Anyway, Tim Legler was on one of the shows last night on ESPN, and we'll get a lot more preview on the finals in the next few days. But here's his first blush at what he sees in the matchup between Oklahoma City and Indiana.
This series is so fascinating because you're talking about not only the best defense in the league, you're talking about really a historically great defense going up against this high-powered Pacers offense. That is firing on all cylinders, obviously, the way they've played over the last few months and so, to this point in the playoffs. Now, here's what it comes down to. The ball pressure from Oklahoma City. This is going to be something different for Indiana. They're not used to seeing their guys picked up 70, 75 feet up the floor. The amount of foot speed that Oklahoma City hits you with, the versatility, the number of elite on-ball defenders. And then, by the way, David, if you get by those guys on the perimeter, all you have waiting on you is Chet Holmgren at the rim. So this is going to be a very difficult task to try to go up against this defense. But I can't think right now in the league of a better offense to try to figure this out than the Indiana Pacers.
Absolutely. OKC number 1 in opponent field goal percentage in both the regular and postseason. The Pacers' legs are the underdogs. They're plus 500. What's the biggest obstacle they're facing in this finals?
Well, listen, here's what it comes down to for them. That their two best players have to be great. Tyrese Haliburton, Pascal Siakam. They're two guys that are going to have to be as good as they possibly can. And it doesn't mean you're going to play great every night in a series, but you really can't have more than one quiet night for either of those guys. They have to be loud. We have to notice them. We have to be talking about them a lot. And then I think you're going to have to figure out a way, because they're very deep, the Pacers. Can you match the depth of Oklahoma City? Because that is something we have raved about all year with the Thunder. The number of guys that Mark Daigneault is comfortable playing, the number of guys that contribute offensively on a given night, obviously built around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Can Indiana's bench match that? Their bench has been sensational in the postseason. So that's another fascinating component to this, because few benches can match the output of OKC.
That is Tim Legler last night on ESPN. The one thing about benches is that you don't play every night. They're off nights, so you have the chance to rest. You probably don't go as deep as you normally would during the regular season, and foul trouble may enter into adult. Though you rarely see a player foul out these days, but that is something that to keep an eye on. As I say, as Indiana is an underdog going into this series. I think of 50 years ago when the Bullets were underdogs against the Golden State Warriors. They did not have the depth. They didn't also have Rick Barry, who was sensational in those finals, and the depth ultimately hurt them. So depth could be a big factor here. But as Tim said, both teams are pretty deep. Oklahoma City deeper, and they have the MVP of the league in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But Pascal Siakam was terrific in that Knicks series. Absolutely terrific. More from NBA, and this was Corey Alexander, and he was on with Dan Patrick on Friday. Corey Alexander had a decent career in the NBA, played at Virginia, was with a variety of teams, San Antonio, Denver, Orlando, and played from 1995 to 2005, missed a year or so, played in Europe a little bit, kind of an average NBA career. And he was talking about what we've just come off of, where, going into the Western Finals, Anthony Edwards was in the conversation as the face of the league. Well, Anthony Edwards didn't get it done. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander got it done. So the question is about being the face of the league. And as Alexander points out here, maybe you don't necessarily want to be.
Our company, Disney, is going to pay $2.8 billion next year for rights to the NBA, which means that it's not about the games, it's about content. And so from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., you have to talk about the game. And therefore, there have to be things to talk about. That's the difference in today's game in comparison to when I was playing in the NBA and even before what you're talking about. There has to be some type of conversation to keep the viewers watching and keep them off of social media and keep them watching TV. So when you think about that, that's the reason why it's constant. And not only that, but these guys don't necessarily care about being the face of the NBA anymore. And the reason being is because when Michael Jordan was playing then, you had to be the face of the NBA to become a billionaire. With these contracts now, you don't have to be. Anthony Edwards can be a billionaire without being the face of the NBA after just 3 contracts and, of course, everything that he gets off the court.
That's Corey Alexander. That's a little bit different because Jordan was clearly the best player in the NBA. The years that he didn't win the MVP, most people agreed he's the best player in the league. And then as far as being the face of it, it was taken to another level by Spike Lee in those commercials that he did for Nike. Mars Blackman, that's when the world really got turned on to Michael Jordan. And, I mean, he's got a point there about salaries. Jordan's top salary until, like, the last few years of his career with the Bulls was like $3.5 million. He was making so much money off the court with Nike, it didn't matter. And now, he's a billionaire thanks to his Nike interests. But what he says is there's some merit to it, but there's also ego. And there's ego. I want to be the face of the NBA. So I'm not sure I buy all of that. Part 2, and this is always interesting to listen to. I would agree that that Steph Curry's the greatest shooter of all time. I don't think, you could really make a case for anyone else. I've seen some great shooters over the years, going back to when Rick Mount was at Purdue. He didn't really have a great professional career, played in the ABA for a while, but man, could he shoot the ball? There are certain guys who just have it. And there's one, and I'm glad he brings this up, because there was a very good documentary that was produced by Tom Friend. It's called Stand. And it's about a player who came into the league as Chris Jackson, but changed his name to Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. And as the documentary points out, he may have been blackballed. This goes back to when he refused to stand for the national anthem when he was playing with Denver. And this was at a period of time when it was very patriotic in this country. The Gulf War was going on and so forth. And he was out of the league at the age of 31. And was still a phenomenal player at 6'1" and like 160 pounds. He played on those LSU teams with Shaq. He may have been the best player. Shaq was the number one pick and one of the great players in the history of the game. But on those LSU teams in the early 1990s, Chris Jackson may have been the best player. This is Corey Alexander with the question, who is the best shooter you ever saw?
I'm going to go as far as to say his name is now Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. He was once Chris Jackson. But you're talking about one of the best. And again, the dude was relentless. He had the best touch. He was so locked in on making every possible shot, and it was so quick. Honestly, and again, Steph Curry's my nephew. I love him to death. Dell's like a big brother to me. Chris Jackson was Steph Curry before Steph Curry. The way the game has changed has allowed for Steph Curry to be able to do what he's doing. If you couldn't hand check Chris Jackson, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, if you couldn't be physical with him the way that the game is played now, I'm not saying that he would have been Steph, but he would have been very close to what we've seen Steph do over the last 10 years.
You want to talk about getting a shot off, like, when his handle was wonderful, and when he was at LSU and he was averaging 30 a game, you had Shaq and Stanley Roberts, but the best player was, 6 feet tall in Chris Jackson. But in today's game, you imagine today's game with Chris, just so quick at getting that shot off.
So quick at getting the shot off, but so quick in general, because as you mentioned, the handle, then he hit me with a between-the-legs crossover one time, and I watched it on the Jumbotron, and I went off the screen completely. You couldn't even find me, and he just absolutely lost me. But the thing is, in that era, and we're going back to, this is 96, my rookie year playing against him, you had to be able to defend. And that's the reason why he didn't get as many minutes. He didn't get as many opportunities, because he struggled defensively. In today's game, where they often find ways to hide guys who lack a defensive end, and you can keep them on the floor for 35 to 40 minutes. If he had that type he had that type of time, and as you talked about, that grace period, again, we still talking about one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, Mark Price is another player who had an unbelievably just go up quick. And, he would average 20-10. There's a lot of those. Kevin Johnson was another 20-10 guy. There just felt like, that's what you had to do back then. That's when you had true point guards, but then Steph became a points guard instead, like he created his own label there. Did you have your welcome to the NBA moment?
I had a lot of them, and when you just mentioned those names, Mark Price, Kevin Johnson, I started getting flashbacks from all those guys having to deal with. But my welcome to the NBA moment, believe it or not, came in preseason my rookie year, and I was playing against Tim Hardaway at UTEP, so a preseason game at UTEP. And, of course, I watched so much. Home court. I watched so much Tim Hardaway growing up and playing. And before the game, I'm a fan. I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, Tim, don't hit me with that." And he said, "Don't worry about it, Corey. You don't have to be concerned, but watch what I do to Avery." And he brought out a new move for Avery in that game. Of course, those two guys had history for being with the Warriors together. And after he hit Avery with the move that pretty much spun Avery in a circle, he just looked over at me and gave me a wink. And I knew I might be in for trouble in this league. from that point on.
That's Corey Alexander, former star at Virginia, journeyman player in the NBA, and now part of ESPN's NBA coverage. There's a lot of other sports stories to get to, including a little bit of news on Alex Ovechkin, which may lead you to believe that next year will be his last. He's been sort of open to the idea of playing after his contract ends after next year with the Capitals, but something breaking over the weekend that might indicate that this is going to be it. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the Sports Capital.
Bram is coming up at 11 o'clock. Alex Ovechkin is turning 40. He's played 20 years with the Capitals. He has 1 year left on his contract. And he said at one point during the season that he didn't expect to sign another deal with the Capitals. And he's indicated that he'd like to finish up his career playing in Russia. He's currently an advisor for the KHL club. He suited up for them during the lockout in 2012. He's competed for Russia in the World Championships after the season ended. I don't think he did it this year. But he's obviously from Russia. His mother still lives there. And his wife is from Russia, Natasha, and they have 2 young children. And she was on a Russian news site called Arguments and Facts. I don't think that's the Russian version of PTI, but it's called Arguments and Facts. And she said that he would not likely return after the 2025-26 season. She said Alexander still has a contract for a year, and so he will play the next season and then fly back to live in Moscow to our homeland. We will stay in Russia, yes. So she's saying that the family is not going to live in the U.S. Now, I would imagine his connection with the team and something that they will want to keep going and for marketing reasons and so forth, they will always keep a connection to the Capitals, whether they own a home here or not. There will be times when he will be paid a lot of money to come back and represent the team, and I'm sure he will do that. But she's saying that, it's not like they're going to hang around here and raise their kids in the D.C. area. They're going back to Moscow. That's clear. Now, the question is, could the family go back there and Ovechkin continue to play here for longer than what's left on his contract? Or would he go with them after next season and they settle down, get all settled into the Russian lifestyle again year round, and that will be their lives? That's apparently what she wants to do. And he may want to do that as well. But after he scored the record-breaking goal, they had this ceremony at Capital One Arena, and he was joking around, Ovechkin. He says, I could sign now for 13 more years. Remember the original contract that he signed, and some thought Ted Leonsis was nuts to give him that 13 years, and then he extended that by 5 years. And so here we are now going into the final year of that. And Ovechkin said in an appearance on the Pat McAfee show a week later, I'll be honest with you, I love the team. I love being around the boys. As long as I can, I'll try to stick around with my great body, how you say in the NHL, so we'll see. The Russian technically becomes eligible for a contract extension July 1st. That's another interesting date. Would the team reach out and say, we don't want next year to be the last. Why don't you sign for another 2 years after that, and we'll see? Could be. I mean, what you heard from this team this year was they really liked each other. The record chase didn't overshadow the season. They like that. They did win a first-round series, which they had not done since they won the Cup in 2018. So there's reason to believe he will play longer, but family also is important here, and the wife is essentially saying, that's it, 1 more year here, and then we're moving to Moscow. So if he wants, she doesn't say this, but it sounds like if he wants to play, he's going to be hanging here in the area without the family. The family's going to be back in Russia, and when he can make it back, like maybe during the All-Star break or after the season, that's fine. But it's also not like your family lives in New York and you're living here. I mean, that's a schlep to Moscow. And we'll see. And we'll see what happens here. Some baseball stuff. The Orioles, as you know, are having a terrible season. They're the second worst team in the American League. The team they just swept, the White Sox, are the worst and the second worst team in baseball. But just to give you an idea, let me look at the standings here. The Orioles, I know, are 14 games under 500. but they have won, I believe, 22 games. They're 22-36. Chicago is 18-41. That stinks. But 18 wins is twice as many as the Colorado Rockies, who have already lost 50 games. That is the worst start of any team in the modern era. 9-50 since 1901. I mean, it's 124 years. They have been swept 10 times in 20 series so far. That's tied for the most sweeps through 20 series with, the 62 Mets, the 1970 Milwaukee Brewers, who, by the way, were in their second year as an expansion team. They'd been